we could not keep up with that activity. I can't speak to which one was import case number 32 and 33. That is too specific. And the TCI person, I don't have an answer to that question at all.
With all due respect, I've been asking. I sent an email. I gave you the press release with the exact announcement, and I have not received a response. And I've also issued it to your press persons as well, and I have not received a response. And it's been over a week. I've been asking for that same information.
All right, Zara, we'll look back at that and we'll provide those responses. Thank you so much.
Okay, there's a question around medical missions coming in and how many medical flights. I really don't know. I mean, the procedure, though, is very transparent. A request is made, and it's a combined approval process involving health and the Border Control and Protection, which is the Ministry of National Security. And decisions are made based on that. I don't think it requires a cabinet approval once the guidelines are in place, the rules of engagement. So clearly the more prominent one would be the one involving the individual from the Turks and Caicos Islands. Have others been since that time? I don't know. I would have to check. But health would definitely be involved, and the Ministry of National Security would be involved. And as explained in the Turks and Caicos situation, it is not unusual, and it is something that we need to do. We have been doing, given the role that the University Hospital of the West Indies plays, the fact that it's a regional institution, and the fact that some of the smaller states, particularly in the region, do not have the specialist capacity. And frankly speaking, with all the restrictions globally and the challenges, we would need to consider this, if for no other reason, on humanitarian grounds, given that lives may depend on it. So if you send me a reminder on that, I know you're saying you have not gotten a response to the reminders, send me a reminder on that. I'll check to see if there have been others, but I don't know, because it's not something I follow up on.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'm going to go to Brittany Clark.
Hello, good evening, everyone. All right, so 2 quick questions for you, Minister Tufton. At the press conference on Monday, you mentioned the role played in the situation involving Miss Jody and Ferron. You mentioned the role played by Spanish Town and the Jubilee hospitals to say that they subscribe to protocol. Is it possible for you to detail that protocol in which they followed? And what can you tell us about the role of Huey and Andrews Memorial Hospital? Because I realized that they were not mentioned. Thank you.
Right. So I did make a statement in Parliament on the matter, and I deliberately kept it brief out of respect for the family members and the grieving that clearly has followed this unfortunate incident. And so in addition to that, of course, there are investigations taking place which I would not want to prejudice. I know the investigators have requested specific information, some along the lines of the questioning that you have advanced, and that information would have been provided to them. And so I want to be brief on it. Without saying much, however, the protocols in a generalized way is that a hospital that requests transfer of a patient to a public institution would be considered, no matter whom that person is, and it would be subject to an assessment of the availability of facilities, depending on what that condition is. To the extent that the facilities are not available, then alternate institution would be tried, and it would continue until you find a solution. In other words, nobody would be denied in a way that does not offer them an opportunity to to get care, because we do subscribe to the universal access principle. In this instance, clearly, again, without saying much, Victoria Jubilee was approached and given certain reasons as to why they could not accommodate at that time, and then Spanish Town similarly so, and they indicated that they could, and the patient eventually ended up at Spanish Town Hospital. The role of the university, the communication was made to them also, as I understand it, and they had some issues related to the patient at that point in time, but offered some additional support, which again is contained in the reports. So yes, there is a protocol, and the protocol was followed based on the reports that came in and what was written and provided to me. However, I did say that if there is a need to review the protocol, it is something that we should definitely do. And in fact, I've asked that it be looked at just to ensure that in no way, shape, or form the protocol would have contributed to this particular tragedy. And I'll stick to that. But again, we'll await the investigations that are taking place so as not to prejudice those investigations.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll go to Romario.
Hi, good afternoon. Two questions.
Just identify your entity, please.
RGR Gleaner Group.
Go ahead.
Hello? Right. So two questions. One, approximately how much of the ministry's COVID budget has been exhausted so far? And will the ministry need more money? And do you have a breakdown of the expenditure so far? Two, how many persons is the ministry preparing for as it relates to the controlled reentry of Jamaicans overseas being allowed into the country? And, you know, how do you have enough test kits to respond to those persons who are going to come in? And when are you expecting those persons to come in?
All right.
So thank you for the question and good afternoon. So at this point in time, the Ministry of Health and Wellness has been provided with approximately $2.8 billion for the COVID response. As at today's date, we have utilized of that amount approximately $2.5 billion. And so we have a balance of about $300 million that is to be utilized for the support of our activities going forward. However, we are now in negotiations with the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service for additional sums to be made available to the ministry over the next 6 months. And that negotiation is ongoing, and as soon as those numbers are finalized with the ministry, we can provide those numbers for you.
Okay, so in terms of the reentry, the Prime Minister would have, I think, adequately represented the plan going forward, reentry. First of all, the general principle of moving in that direction. We have had, as you know, some controlled reentry, and that went through very smoothly. And there are plans afoot to increase that. Those plans are taking place and are a function of several agencies and ministries. I'm sure the Prime Minister will announce the details of those in the days ahead, and I'll allow him to finalize in his mind, based on the advice that he will receive, how we will proceed along those lines. But from a public health perspective, it is a function of our capacity to monitor the persons who are coming in based on the quarantining procedures that are outlined and have been used in the past. And in the initial stages, that would be a key element. it would also be influenced, as you have correctly pointed out, by our testing capacity. And in regards to your question around testing, I think we're adequately equipped to do testing. We have significantly improved capacity, and so we are comfortable that any gradual reentry that is finally agreed on would not run into any difficulties as it relates to testing because of the additional capacity that we have put in. As to the specifics of that reentry, I will allow the Prime Minister to comment on that definitively. I know it is a matter that has occupied the minds of himself and the Cabinet and continues to do so, and will be known and made more public in the coming days.
Thank you very much, Minister. We're going to go to Damien.
Thank you very much. Minister, let me begin with a question I asked you on Monday that was not answered. Can you indicate how many health workers have tested positive for the coronavirus since you last reported that there were 7 cases? That's question 1. 2, is there an explanation for what appears to be the slow rate of recovery of COVID patients? 3, how advanced is the retrofitting of the National Arena as a field hospital, and who has the supply contracts? And question 4, can the Ministry of Health indicate whether it is investigating a suspected COVID case at the Administrator General's Department in Montego Bay, which has ordered a closure for 14 days effective April 27?
You're very fast with those questions, Damien. I heard the health workers. I heard the field hospital, right? Field hospital
Yes.
contracts. I heard the, which other one was there?
Well, if I can just go again, the second
Accountant General,
Administrator
General, and then the fourth one was what again? Sorry.
That was the fourth one. So I want to know, 1, in respect of the number of health workers.
Yeah, I got that.
2, if there is an explanation for what appears to be the slow rate of recovery. Several people have been asking.
Recovery.
And question 3, yes,
okay.
the retrofitting of the National Arena as a field hospital and who has its contracts. And 4, whether the ministry is investigating a suspected case at the Administrator General's Department, which has ordered a closure for 14 days effective April 27.
All right, so I'll ask the PS to deal with the number of health workers, and then Annie could deal with the field hospital also. The Administrator General will ask the doctor.
Okay. At this point in time, we have confirmed health worker in terms of persons who work in hospitals and health facilities. We have 5 health workers that are currently positive for COVID-19. We have conducted a series of tests for the Ministry of Health and Wellness. As you are aware, we had 7 cases confirmed. Since that time, we have done sampling for over 300 members of staff, and we're receiving those results we're receiving those results now. So I am hoping to have those numbers available by tomorrow, so that we would be able to report on the exact number of persons in the Ministry of Health and Wellness that have been impacted. But of the 7 persons that have been impacted to date, 3 of them are in hospital and are improving, and others are in isolation and are doing fairly well. The field hospital. We are currently in negotiation with a contractor, and therefore I wouldn't want to compromise that negotiation by declaring who that contractor is. But we have utilized our emergency contracting procedures to have that contract let in the shortest period of time, and that negotiation is slated to come to some finality by next week Wednesday, at which time we will have a public signing, and the contract and the successful contractor will be made public. We go again. Right. And we have concluded negotiations with the Jamaica Defense Force, who will be the technical supervisors of the contract for the retrofitting of the national arena to be a field hospital.
Okay, thank you. With respect to the Administrator General Department, we don't have a report yet. We will ask the Western Region to supply that report, and we'll get back to you on that. With respect to the recovery is defined when a person is negative, two negative smears. So the person would be feeling very well, probably 2 weeks feeling well, but their sample is not negative yet. And so they are recovered, but not, well, they are well, but not defined as recovered because they don't have the two negative test results.
Thank you very much, Dr. Westercar. We're going to go to Jamaica Social.
Good evening, folks. I'm Cassius Watson from Jamaica Social. Minister, I think 2 days or so ago, we recently heard the Prime Minister say that, or you mentioned on that particular day that you had acquired, with the help of the Jamaica Public Service, 2 extra Cobas machines, which would now put you somewhere around 3. On average, from what I've understood over the past few days or so, speaking about that particular machine, you can average about 300 tests per day, which would put us at around 900 or between 800 and 900, the possibility of conducting that amount of tests per day. Is it the ministry's goal to eventually test every Jamaican, 2.odd million of us, over the next couple months? Or is it to do as many tests as you can until a vaccine is ready? Thanks.
Right. So you may have gotten you did get the machines mixed up in terms of where they are and when we got them. The Cobas machine was actually acquired and located at the National Public Health Lab, which is downtown, and that machine has started working. It does increase significantly the capacity to test. Theoretically, you could do over 1,000 per 24-hour workload. That's theoretically speaking. I don't think you'll get there because we're not going to run 3 shifts unless absolutely necessary. And then recently we got 2 additional machines as a gift from the Jamaica Public Service Company and their Korean partner. And that one is placed at the National Influenza Center at the University of the West Indies, and that will also add capacity. So yes, you're right. We're comfortable in terms of the capacity that has been added. Over time, the testing protocol will have to be adjusted. And so one of the things we're looking at now is antibody testing, and that will be introduced, particularly as you open up, which is a different type of testing to look now at the antibodies, which means the exposure level of the individual and by extension the population to the virus. That testing is likely to be a more mass testing mechanism, as I understand it. And so to answer your question about the 2.odd million in the next couple of months, I don't think that we will get to 2.odd million because that's not the current approach. There is a protocol that governs testing, which we think has worked for us to date, even though that protocol is subject to change, which means more testing, but maybe a different kind of testing over the next couple of months, which could lead to a lot more people being tested, but not necessarily the 2.odd million that you have asked about.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to Janelle Campbell.
Okay, good evening. 2 quick questions.
Just tell us what entity you're from, please.
My apologies, Jonalie Campbell, NCUFM. So 2 quick questions. With testing primarily focused on St. Catherine right now. What is the testing protocol and what governs the other sections of the island getting their test results just as quickly? And secondly, understanding that people can be asymptomatic after coming in contact with a positive case, how soon after coming in contact with a positive person can you show positive for the coronavirus test?
So if I understand you correctly, you're asking about the testing protocol for St. Catherine, as opposed, and how does that affect the rest of the country, if that's what you were asking in the first question. The St. Catherine, as you know, is ground zero currently on the spread of the virus, primarily because of the workplace cluster, which accounts for some well over 240 of the 396 cases to date. The contact tracing based on that particular entity is what has guided in a targeted way the numbers of tests that have been done, and that includes the staff of that entity, but their close contacts based on the contact tracing arrangements. So it may be a staff member and who that staff member lives with, because of course if they could transmit the disease or the virus from themselves to that home. And we have seen that. We have seen over 40 contacts being diagnosed with the virus, and just over 200 of the staff. That's an ongoing process, and that will determine the targeted approach to testing. Beyond that, however, there are tests that are routinely administered across the country, including St. Thomas, via health centers and hospitals, based on established protocols that addresses persons coming in with flu-like symptoms, respiratory illness, persons who may have had contact with someone, and health workers who may have been exposed, and the rest of the country is not deprived from those tests because of the work that is taking place in St. Catherine. So just to assure you that there is it's not a either or either. The entire country is administered based on those protocols. But at the same time, St. Catherine is a particular point of interest because of the particular location. The second question, that was the second question. You want to address the second question?
Yes, thank you. The person may become positive depending on their own response 1 to 14 days after exposure. If they are asymptomatic, then they are likely to become positive later.
We're going to take our final couple of questions. We're going to go to Dion.
Thank you so much. Mr. Minister, we ask 4 and 5 questions at a time because we only get one shot at the mic. I have 4 questions. With your permission, may I ask 2 and allow you to answer and ask the other 2, or even 1 at a time if you prefer?
Go ahead, Dion.
Thank you so much. Has the ministry completed its investigation finally into the Jody and Ferron matter, or do you plan to do any additional inquiries?
Have we completed the investigation? Well, the reports have come in from the hospitals, as I had outlined publicly and stated in the Parliament yesterday, as to what transpired from the perspective of the institutions. The police investigations was triggered independent of us. Up to today, I know interviews were being conducted, reports were being requested, and so that is an ongoing process. I think the autopsy should have been performed today, if I'm not mistaken, also. Well, should have been. I'm not sure if it did. So what I had said in the Parliament, Dion, is that we want to await the investigations that are taking place, and while the report that I received from the senior team who inquired of the respective institution as to what transpired, suggests that protocols were followed in terms of transferring a patient. There are some other lingering concerns that I have as minister. I'm concerned to ensure that the protocols are, in fact, the most efficient, and to the extent that they could have avoided a situation like this from occurring, I would like to be convinced of that. And I've said that internally that we need to look at that. I am concerned about, and increasingly so, about the operations of private hospitals. I've not made a big issue of it, but I've asked for a report on what are the sort of requirement protocols of how a private entity operates, because, you know, I do think that the time may be now for us to have a stronger regulatory framework in terms of what is required to establish a hospital. Now, I'm saying that without casting any blame on the particular institution, because I don't have all the information. But the truth is, part of my request for information is to get information from an entity that I do not have control over, which is the Andrews Memorial Hospital. And it does, even though I've had an account that was made public through a statement, it does create a level of incompleteness that I would prefer to have had greater authority to request or to require. And as a consequence, I think there's going to be a need, I think, in my view, to really look at that. So if you take all of those things into consideration, then I believe it would be fair to say that we have not ended the process, because there are still some things that I'd like to be satisfied with as minister. But I don't want to prejudice the criminal investigation, one. Secondly, I want to respect the grieving and the privacy of the family members who have asked for that publicly, which is why I don't comment too much on the issue. But I think that there are still some questions to be answered.
Okay, is the report then, I've heard everything you said, but I do like to have things as clear as possible. Mm-hmm. Will the report then be made public, and what will be done about whatever conclusions or recommendations have been made? Right.
So again, I say, in my view, the conclusions of the report have been made public. Again, I went to the Parliament and I read out the substantial conclusions. The actual report with all its details have not been, and I'm not sure at this time it is the appropriate thing to do. But I stand to be advised otherwise, but because of the investigations taking place, and I said it's available to the investigators, and they have actually accessed some of that information today. I know for sure.
All right, two more. One, I heard your statement in Parliament. I also, your statement in Parliament, you named Spanish Town and Jubilee as having followed protocol. So your statement suggested that UWI did not. I listened to your response to Brittany, but I'm not any clearer. Did UWI follow protocol or not?
Well, we got a report from the university also, and that report does suggest that they also followed protocol. I thought, didn't I say that in the statement? The statement only spoke to, I thought the statement spoke to all the institutions, including the university. But we did get a report from the University Hospital of the West Indies, which suggested that. Okay,
and finally, I just spoke to Isaac Buchanan on air, the attorney who is representing Jodian's family. Mm-hmm. Minutes ago, he says he's inviting you to withdraw your assertion that Spanish Town and Jubilee followed protocol. Do you wish to do so? And if not, why not?
No, clearly, I mean, I don't take orders from, let me phrase it more diplomatically. I have confidence in the team that I've asked to generate the reports. They have looked at it in a very they have been asked to look at it in a manner that is analytical and not just accept what they read. They have submitted their recommendations, and I would prefer to be guided by them than by anyone else for now, except to say that I think that there are several recourse that are available to the grieving family members, of course, legal representation being one. And if I were in their position, I would certainly do the same thing. So I fully respect that. And the investigations, of course, that are taking place otherwise. So, you know, the system allows for checks and balances. And I do believe that the processes that are at play as we speak will allow for that to happen. And I think it is the right thing. And I will accept any decision that flows from those processes. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much, Minister. And I think we have to end the questions there. Thank you so much for all our media partners who participated. Of course, we invite everyone to continue as we continue the second segment of the COVID conversation. Minister?
Okay, thank you very much. And I certainly hope that our viewers and listeners will continue to listen in as we go along. We're always available for additional questions. Our media partners know who to contact, and to the extent that we are incomplete in some of the responses, I ask them to follow up with Stephen and to myself or others, and we'll try to address those concerns and thank them for their continued coverage of this important issue. So we wanted to look at the issue of testing, and we have online Dr. Michelle Hamilton, who is the director for the National Lab Services. Testing has been an issue. We've heard questions asked about the delays in testing, and I think it's important for the public to understand from start to finish, in a shortened version though, how we go about testing from the collection of samples through to reaching the lab, sorting, and the actual tests and results. Dr. Hamilton, how are you?
I am very well, sir.
Can you start, please? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. When samples are collected at the various points, they are transported to the lab. And at the lab, there are three phases: the pre-analytical, the analytical, and the post-analytical. In the pre-analytical phase, we log the sample into our system and we prepare the sample for testing. In the analytical phase, we do the actual testing. And in the post-analytical phase, we document the results that have come from the different samples, and of course, we then disseminate them. We give them out to the relevant persons. Now, it sounds simple to say, but we have to remember that we adhere to very strict international quality standards, and so there are checks and balances in each of these phases to ensure that we give not just a result, but an accurate result. So it often involves a team of individuals working together to cross-check at various points to ensure that everything is done in such a way that when you actually get your result, you can have confidence that this is an accurate representation of what is happening with the individual patient.
There have been some complaints around the delays in testing and test results. I mean, what in your mind has contributed to that? And are we on a path now to overcome that, given that giving a sample is an experience in and of itself? Getting the results and the anxieties around the wait can be quite traumatic.
Right.
Tell us about that backlog issue and how we have resolving it, if any.
We understand that once you have been tested, you very much want to see the result because you want to know, are you positive, are you negative? What has happened is that I am sure the country will be well aware that recently we had an upsurge in the number of cases, and that meant that we had to increase not only the testing of the persons who were found to be positive, but all of their contacts. So we had to do mass testing to determine who was positive and then follow up on the contacts, because of course we are trying to contain the spread of the viral infection. Now, initially when there was the surge, the number of samples that were being collected exceeded our capacity to test on any given day. And so there was a buildup of the samples awaiting testing. But recently, the Ministry of Health has, through the National Laboratory Services, launched a new platform, the COBA 6800, that has boosted the testing capacity. And therefore, we are currently now working through the backlog of samples and proceeding now to test incoming samples. So we did have a brief time when our system was getting more samples in than could be tested. But now with the COBA 6800, we have been working through the backlog of samples, and I'm informed that we currently have, less than 400 samples in the backlog. And given our capacity for testing, we expect that in short order, that will be finished. And then with the new testing capacity, we will adequately be able to cope with the level of the incoming samples.
I want to ask you two quick final questions on testing, because I think it's important. Firstly, tell us about the current test and what it aims to do, as opposed to the rapid antibody tests that we will introduce over time, and why the two. What's the distinction between the two, and why one may be more a mass test as opposed to the more targeted approach by the current one that we use?
The PCR test that we are using is a diagnostic test. So it identifies the presence of the actual virus in the individual. So if you have the infection, you will have the virus in your body, and we will be able to detect the virus using the PCR technique. That's the current technique. The antibody tests are based upon the body's reaction to the virus. So when your body is invaded by any kind of foreign material, in this case a virus, it builds up antibodies. But these antibodies take time to develop. So the antibody tests are tests that will only give us a result, a positive result, after some time. So if we want to catch the infection early, then we go for the presence of the virus itself before the antibody builds up. After we have had the virus circulating in any given population, and we want to look, for example, at how many people may have been infected by the virus, then we could proceed to look at antibody tests. But they are going to tell us that you had an infection, because what you are measuring is not the presence of the infectious agent. You are measuring the effect that it produced on the body. So it's two different approaches. If you want to contain the infection, the spread of the infection, as we are doing now, you want to catch it as early as possible and limit its spread. So you don't want to wait, the weeks that you may have to wait to get an antibody response from the body to say, yes, the infection was there. Because in that time, you would have had COVID and could possibly have been transmitting the virus to others. So we want at this time to go in quickly, find out who is infected using the PCR method, and try to stem the infection.
Thank
the
you.
spread of the infection in the population.
Thanks, Doc. And the final one is, how has your experience as head of the testing facility in the country under COVID been, both you and your staff? I mean, this is more a personal, human capacity question. I mean, what has it been like? The workload, the stress level, and
Sir,
how have you been able to manage that process?
the workload has increased tremendously because, as you would be aware, the fact that we have COVID does not mean that we don't have the other things that we would monitor routinely. So for us to utilize our staff for tests for COVID, it is an added test that we are mounting. And I would like to say that the team has risen to the occasion. We have a team of consultant microbiologists, we have medical technologists, we have laboratory technical assistants, we have everybody, the drivers who transport the sample, everybody has come together and decided to go the extra mile. So persons are working longer hours. We literally have now shifts working on a 24-hour basis, whereas most of the persons would have been working on an 8-hour basis, because we understand that the country is dependent upon us at this time to be able to give them the results that they need. So it has been a time of increased activity, and there are times when you feel the pressure of the work, but it's also been a wonderful time when it has brought out the best in that instead of running from the work, we have decided, to put our shoulders to the plow and really go for it on behalf of all of us in this nation. So it's been a difficult time in terms of pressure, but it's been a good time in terms of the overall experience.
Dr. Hamilton, I just want to take the opportunity to thank you. Thank you for this expose on air, and thank you and the team for the work that you've been doing. Very happy to hear that we're making progress in terms of the expanded testing capacity. And I think the distinction between antibody testing, rapid test kits, and testing for the virus itself is an important and useful distinction. And just to say to the country, we're moving into the antibody stage. It is a phased approach. It's not that we are late. It's just that time is just coming. Thank you very much.
That's right.
And
yes,
keep up
sir.
the good work. Okay, we are moving quickly now online, and I am assuming she's on, to speak with the Director of Health Promotion and Protection, Dr. Simone Spence. Listeners, as you know, the Honorable Prime Minister announced 3 additional days for the restrictions in St. Catherine being the epicenter of the virus with the most cases and with a going concern represented by a workplace cluster. After Friday, when things are opened up, assuming that takes place, and I think we're on track for that, without second guessing the cabinet. Monday morning, chances are persons are out back to work. And the issue around employers, employees, dealing with staff members that they may think are exposed. There may be even a little stigma around St. Catherine people, which we would like to discourage and hope that doesn't occur. There are a lot of issues around the workplace and COVID and what management's response or employees' response should be. So we asked Dr. Spence to come on and just to spend a few minutes with us explaining, what should employers or employees do if they suspect persons with COVID symptoms. Dr. Spence? Dr. Spence? Okay. Okay. Is Dr. Spence on now? We would, until you get her on, we would also like to discuss Dr. Spence, are you hearing? She's talking, but I don't think she's, her voice, or the volume isn't projecting. So the issue is, what should we be doing at the workplace in terms of employees and employers? Dr. Spence, are you on?
I'm on, sir, but I'm hearing you.
Okay, we're hearing you. So can you help us and the listeners to appreciate the employer-employee relationship as it relates to symptoms of COVID? What should be done at the workplace?
All right, thank you so much, Minister. And in terms of what it is that should be done, importantly, we have to make sure as both employees and employers that we are practicing the infection prevention and control measures that we all should be very familiar with, but I'll just remind us of some of them. And so in terms of our hand washing practices, especially as persons come back into the workspace, making sure that the staff members or customers and persons accessing these workspaces have an ability to wash their hands with soap and water, or that we have hand sanitization stations in prominent places around the workplace, that both customers and staff can access. Importantly, I think as well is in terms of promoting good respiratory hygiene within the workspace. So making sure persons are covering their coughs and sneezes, and making sure that we are not touching our face in terms of our eyes, nose, and mouth, especially after having coughed and sneezed, and making sure we are washing our hands or sanitizing our hands thereafter. When we are wearing our mask, we have to make sure we are practicing proper mask etiquette, because a lot of persons we see are adhering and wearing masks, but they're not should fit our faces properly and cover our nose and mouth, importantly, but also should be able to breathe while wearing these masks so that it doesn't become that uncomfortable. And make sure that we practice it or hand hygiene as well, because wearing the mask alone is not going to offer full protection. It is that we have the mask as well as practicing our hand hygiene and all the other infection prevention and control measures at the same time. We have to look at our surfaces, keeping our environment around us within our workspace clean. So making sure that we're cleaning the surfaces, so the desks and the tables, the objects that we frequently touch. So for example, we're taking the elevator buttons, our desktops, in terms of keyboards, in terms of equipment, such as headphones and headsets that we may need to use as an operator. We should have those assigned to specific persons where we shouldn't be sharing that. And as the employer or workspace should really have a designated cleaning schedule. And so the cleaning staff or janitorial staff should be aware of the cleaning schedule and increase the frequency of cleaning of the frequently touched surfaces, and make sure that in terms of the cleaning at the facility that happens every day in a particular way. Importantly, finally, is in terms of how is it that as we pull persons back into the workspace, we are still maintaining certain things. So for example, maintaining the physical distance of 6 feet at our workstations, making sure that as a part of our business continuity plan, we have persons working from home where possible, conducting our meetings virtually. And if it is we have to have in-person, face-to-face meetings, we are at least maintaining and practicing physical distancing while we're in these meeting spaces. Making sure that we sensitize our staff and resensitize them as to how COVID-19 is transmitted. And so therefore they have an understanding as to why it is important that we practice these key prevention measures. Importantly, Minister, you would have mentioned about the stigma and discrimination. It's important to reinforce the point that anybody at all, any one of us, can be impacted or affected by COVID-19. We have it. And so therefore, we really should not be stigmatizing those persons coming back to work, whether they were suspected, confirmed or not, and coming back to work from St. Catherine as having COVID-19, because we're all in this fight together. We must know what our plan is overall as a business or as an employer, to say when it is that somebody does become ill at work, what is the plan that we have to, for example, isolate this person away from others and ensure that we then move the person from the workspace to home in a safe and appropriate manner. If it is that person needs assistance, who are we going to call in order to help where that is concerned? And so finally, I would just encourage that employers and employees know what their business continuity plan entails and make sure that all the relevant team members are aware of it. Reinforce infection prevention and control measures by placing different cues to actions or posters or reminders for persons to be able to see and be reminded of what it is that they should be putting into practice. But importantly, we have to assign persons to monitor that the practices are actually taking place and are being implemented. Discourage the stigma and discrimination. And I'm sure, as you often say, Minister, that everyone counts, that in this we can all beat COVID-19 because we're all in this together.
Thank you, Dr. Spence. You've answered all the questions that I would have posed, so that's good. But just finally, though, for those who may want to further remind themselves, because I think it's a very important issue, given that we've had restrictions, we've had stay-at-home orders, persons will have to go back out. How do they cope in that environment? Now, I gather that the ministry has prepared material to provide further guidance to both employers and employees. Can you refer us to where that can be found, and so that others can, persons can visit and share and learn from that?
Right. So we do have an interim guide for COVID-19 recommendations for infection prevention and control for employees and employers. And this can be found at the Ministry of Health and Wellness's website.
Can you remind us of the website address, or Stephen, can you? You can turn on your mic and remind us.
All right, so persons can go to moh.gov.jm, and on the homepage, you click on the resources button at the bottom of the page.
I think it's important, listeners. Thank you, Dr. Spence. I think it's very important because increasingly persons who are exposed to or confirmed as having had COVID will have to reintegrate into the society. And the stigma has been a very strong issue. It has been a big concern. Persons have suffered from it, and we have to overcome. And part of overcoming that is going to be how employers treat with their employees, having discerned that they would have been exposed or they were contaminated. And opening up St. Catherine, I think, may offer the largest test, given that so many companies pull their workforce from St. Catherine. We would like, it may be an awkward moment for employers and employees. So we encourage employers to visit the website, look at the material. If they have questions, they can call 8881-LOVE for more information. But I think it's going to be important for us to address that issue as part of the Everyone Counts, so we can restore normality. At this time, and finally, no, not yet, we are going into the final segment, which is to look at mental health and stigma around COVID-19. As said earlier, stigma is a big issue because there is a perception around COVID-19 that it is a disease, that people bring it onto themselves, that they are going to contaminate others and a community, that it is a curse of some kind, and it will have negative impact on a community. And so people shun, ignore, rebuff, and in some instances are even violent, threaten violence against persons who have COVID. Now, I want to remind you, and Dr. Webster, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the projections are that over a 12-month period, most Jamaicans are likely to be exposed to COVID. So to practice discrimination against the early infectors, if you will, only may mean that you yourself may become a victim later on, and the probability of that happening could be greatly enhanced. So it is something that we have to deal with as and accept and come to terms with, and the sooner the better. Am I correct, Dr. Webster?
Yes, Minister. We look at almost 2/3 of us will get COVID-19. Some of us may not even know, but we would have had it. So to discriminate against somebody at this time is really not the way to go, because what goes around comes around. So we should be compassionate to those persons who are suffering from that condition now.
And of course, this will lead us into the final segment around mental health and stigma. The truth is, quarantining and isolation are lonely experiences and can be very lonely experiences, particularly given the culture of Jamaicans who like to move around, like to congregate, like to gather, whether in the churches or in the bars or on the street corner. That's the nature, that's our culture, that's what we do. To say you need to lock up yourself for 14 days in a room, you know, whether you're being treated aggressively because you're ill or you're asymptomatic, means isolating or separating yourself. And then all types of thoughts can go through your mind at that stage, and it can be debilitating. So there is a direct link between the remedy for COVID and your mental health, your state of mind. And I think it's important for us to understand that. So Dr. Sapphire Longmore, Senator Dr. Sapphire Longmore, a psychiatrist, is online, and we wanted her to just tell us quickly a little about the mental health impact or potential impact and some coping mechanisms to deal with that. Senator Dr. Longmore?
Hi, Minister Tufton. How are you?
Not bad. Welcome.
To your listeners and other guests. Thank you.
Sure. So you want to just enlighten us around the mental health impact of COVID and isolation and quarantine and how we can cope as a society?
Sure. By all means. I mean, firstly, we have to recognize that the adjustment has to happen on many levels. We are collectively, as well as individually, going through what is really a disaster. It's just a slow occurring disaster, so to some extent, and so the reaction is somewhat the same. And it is almost even more extensive than what we experience as a hurricane or as something that happens and then we get over it and then we adjust back to our normal lives. What is really very trying about this is that there seems to be no definite end at this point in time. And we are also appreciating that in some way our lives will be changed. We don't know yet how. But and remember that humanity has not really ever experienced anything like this. So we are also learning as we go along. But as any other stressor in life, when things come your way that are unexpected, the best prevention and the best way to cope with such is to try as best to prepare for such. And so in terms of us putting in the mechanisms to adjust to the change in lifestyle that we have to now face, is recognition that preparation emotionally, physically, mentally, and socially. And because these are the facets of health when you really look at it. And in terms of preparation mentally, recognize that once we sense that we're losing control of something is when people need help. We all go through anxiety, we all go through depression, but when we sense that we're losing control of those emotions, that is when we recognize that we need some help in reinstating that control. And so seeking help, reaching out, actively owning how you are feeling. You have all right to feel angry, you have all right to feel sad, but when you recognize that it is getting out of control, seek the help that might be available. Physically, we know that we can do preventative measures around COVID, living a healthy lifestyle, trying to take our immune boosters, some of our natural things that we know, our vitamin C, etc., etc. But exercise. And it doesn't mean that we have to go and do anything expensive or anything like that. But etch out some time in your day where 10, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, depending on how, physically enabled you are, to find a little space, still socially distancing, and getting that heart rate up, getting that exercise going. It helps in many ways, even in terms of if you happen to get COVID, you are likely to treat with it better. Socially, reach out and still you're not able to make physical contact, but you can socialize in other ways. Use technology to your advantage. Make the effort to connect with people who you maybe have not connected with in a long time, but use this time now as a plus to say, you know what, I would not have been doing and I would not have been meeting up and catching up with this person if it were not for COVID, and put a positive spin on it. You have certain persons who are essential in your life who may be of the older age group. Reach out to them. Let them know that you are there. Let them know that you care. However, you can send a little helping hand, you do that. If you need to leave a little care package on their doorstep or something for them and tell them that it's out there, if you need to send a little money somehow or something like that, send a way of connecting and touching somebody's heart without physically being in contact with them. And of course, emotionally, recognize that you are all and we are all going through this thing collectively. Recognize that it is okay to feel how you feel, own it, and then deal with it. It makes no sense for us to try and put on a brave face and then crumble on the inside. We need to come to grips with the fact that this is something that we're all going through and that we need to be there for each other. And there are a couple other little things that I definitely would also advocate in terms of especially our spiritual health at this time. A lot of persons, especially in the high-risk groups, recognize that they may be facing their mortality. We all have had collectively to face and recognize that there is a limit to what we think we are capable of as humans, and that there is greater powers beyond what we can control. And so we have to also seek to touch and reach out in that spiritual way to connect with the fact that we are at peace with ourselves and we're at peace with the world around us, and trying to probably help somebody through this process. And in helping somebody through this process, you may actually help yourself. So many ways that we need to just own it and recognize it.
Let me ask you, Doc, the children are at home, and this idea of children staying in one place or one setting for extended period of time can be mentally challenging to them, but also to their caregivers. Any thoughts on that?
It goes counter to the natural way of things. Children are not meant to stay in one place and adhere to rules and regulations all the time. It is just not natural. And we have to allow that. We as parents have to recognize that different age group of children will also be demonstrating different ways of adjusting to the situation. So the very young child may not actually verbalize or be able to say what their fears are. They are definitely picking up that life has changed. They're not seeing their little friends at school. All of a sudden, everybody has to be home. It is a very changing world. And they are picking up a lot on how you adjust. So when you do all of these healthy measures to adjust, you're not just helping yourself, but you're helping them. But you might find that they become more clingy. You might find that they're asking a lot of questions. You might find that they want a bit more physical reassurance. You might find that they just want to cuddle and just be literally under your like my sons, they're literally under my dress or on my skirt, just hanging on, because they pick up that something is not right. And you have to find a way to explain to them, break down the COVID situation in simple terms, explain to them what is going on, but also explain to them that this is under control, that this is something that mommy and daddy, or mommy alone or daddy alone, or whatever parent or guardian, that we are still there for you, that we are still going to be caring. Try and seek out ways of still having fun, of laughing, of still remembering the happy times and engage in the happy times, so that they see that life is not permanently changed and the good elements of life is still there. Some of the older kids, sorry.
No, I'm saying that's good advice. I wanted to just ask the final one, though, back to St. Catherine. Assuming all goes well and the people of St. Catherine are allowed to now move out of quarantine and isolation, well, quarantining in particular, because those in isolation have to be guided on their movements by their respective physicians based on negative tests. And they are now moving into their workspaces with management. It could be envisioned as an awkward moment, given the reasons behind the separation, if you will. How do you restore mental normalcy, if there's such a term, having had the experience on both sides? What would be the icebreaker, if you will, from a mental health perspective?
Well, Minister, I tell you, I think one of the things that we all need to come to some grasp of is that COVID is here and something that we all have to wrap our minds around. Even the Prime Minister mentioned that it is possible that everybody at some point might get it. It is not necessarily a death sentence, and I must congratulate you and your team because the recovery rate and how well our patients who have been positive are faring compared to other countries, Jamaica's response has been really very, very responsible. And so we need to, especially in our setting, recognize that we do have our pluses and our benefits. And we must not shy away from caring for those who may be thusly affected. We need to take our personal responsibility of taking the precautions to protect ourselves. I am a big advocate of, like I said, natural immune boosters, getting the exercise, staying away from maladaptive measures. So a lot of persons are engaging in alcohol use and cigarette smoking as a way to cope. Those could be very negative if you were to get COVID. So in terms of persons going back in the environment, people need to be a bit more calm with each other and recognize that we're all humans. And what you would expect someone, how you would expect someone to react to you, that is how you should react to them. And the persons who are out of quarantine, conscious of the fact that people may be a little bit apprehensive. Don't just be, for in-person space. Recognize that you have a responsibility to slowly, somewhat reintegrate, to demonstrate that you are wearing your mask, you're washing your hands, you're keeping your social distance, you're acting responsibility. If you're feeling sick, stay home and be responsible and demonstrate that, okay, I may have been in an affected area, but I am doing what I need to do, and there's no fear. There's no need to fear my reintegration into society.
I think we lost you, Doc, but your points are extremely valid, and we hope that our listeners got the substance of what you're saying. Your mental health matters. This is a traumatic period for all of us, and particularly for persons who have been quarantined, who have been isolated, who have been separated from their normal course of activity and interaction. It represents, in a sense, a new norm, at least for a period of time, but who knows, it may change how we interact with each other for some time to come in keeping with good hygiene practices. So thank you very much for that. We want to thank also Dr. Simone Spence for issues around the workplace. Remember to visit the website for further information on that. There are many employers out there who may want to benefit from those guidelines, and employees. And of course, Dr. Michelle Hamilton for the update on lab services, and in particular the different types of testing and where we're headed. So ladies and gentlemen, in keeping with our hour and a half time for this session, I think we have a few minutes to go, so we're on track. I want to just remind you that Jamaica has now recorded 396 confirmed cases, 32 cases in the last 48 hours, and we are continuing our efforts at managing and controlling COVID-19. We did anticipate that we would get to the point where we would see more cases at this time, but under the circumstances in terms of our responsiveness, hospital care, recovery, our contact tracing, which I really am impressed with, the team on the ground, in the field, making contact. I think as a country, we are going through the learning curve, but learning very quickly in terms of how to cope with this virus, which should be around for some time to come. So we're going to close off now with a final feature, which is a video montage of material that is... Oh, okay, well, that's not what my... That's not my brief. Sorry, we're going to close off with a video on the recap of my visit to the COBAS machine at the National Public Health Lab. We discussed that earlier on, and those who can view will get hopefully a little more enlightened as to that machine and what it does. In the meantime, 888 New Life is our mental health hotline, 888 New Life, or you can call for further information, 888 One Love, for additional information around COVID-19. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will continue to keep you informed, in touch, and hopefully motivate you to play your part, as everyone counts in the fight against COVID-19. Thanks a lot. Enjoy your evening. Stay safe, follow the rules, don't take any risk. If there are any issues that you think will result in your being less than fully prepared, tell the CMO, tell Dr. Havins, tell me, because we want to make sure that you have the maximum protection so that you can be fully motivated to do the work that you do. All right? Thank you. All right, guys, so we're going to turn this on so it starts working.
That's it. Minister is now going to commission the machine for its basically in order run. So you press and it will start.
All right, guys.
That's it.
Processing place.
All right, guys, remember,